Hello everyone, and welcome to the Cybersecurity versus UX, the Eternal Clash webcast. My name is Michel Sorbet, and I represent Finanteq, a Polish software and consulting company focused on mobile finance. I am joined today by Vidar, Krey, Head of Development at Promon, a Norwegian company specialized in providing app security software. Hello, Jan.
Hello, Michal. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you a lot for this meeting. I'm very anxious to talk today about cybersecurity and its supposed clash with user experience. So just to give a little background to our viewers and listeners, our two companies have been cooperating already for some time. And when we look back at the reasons why such a cooperation even started, this would be the willingness of providing not only the best and the most innovative mobile solutions for banking, but also providing a level of security, both from the bank's perspective as well as from the end user's point of view. And so this shared aim brought us together, and this is also the reason why we are meeting and talking today. So now during this webcast, we would like to raise an interesting subject, which will be the supposed clash and opposition between user experience and how a user interacts. So how a user interacts with and experiences a mobile banking application and cyber security. Security is often perceived as a hindrance. Therefore, the trick is not only to protect the customer by using different types of solutions, but to do it in such a way that it doesn't affect the customer satisfaction. And looking from the bank's perspective, security is very often the brake on change. But should it be perceived in such a way, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I think there are lots of ways to look at security and look at how do you do trade-off between having good security on one side and having a good user experience on the other side. And user experience can be lots of different things, like you have to jump through different hoops to achieve something. You have to provide a certain external security mechanism, or it could be like degraded performance or other things that you might have to do. And I think that's a slightly binary way of looking at it, as in you have to choose either one or the other, or one on the or at the expense of the other, which I don't think is completely accurate always. So I think you can do quite a lot by actually increasing security and also getting a increase in the user experience at the same time. A little bit depending on what you're trying to build, but also careful design around it.
Okay, so the perceived clash between both is only illusionary, and in fact, those two elements are extremely important elements of designing each and every mobile application. And this is also something which clients in the end want, because clients want to use secured applications, and they don't want to be afraid of using applications. They just want to use them in a very easy way, but at the same time have the feeling that they are secured. So simplicity, appearance, but also trust. It's important for clients.
Absolutely. I think also, just to add a bit more flavor to it, if you remember, like 15 years ago, you always had the option to go online to your bank using your web browser to do payments and so on. But the recommendation was, please make sure that you have antivirus on your computer in order to do that. Because if not, well, all sorts of bad stuff could happen, right? So then you needed to have like an external hardware token to maybe do some authentication on the side, or maybe you were using your phone and doing some SMS codes and so on. And those are kind of extra things that you have to do as a user, which is improving security, but at the cost of the usability and the user experience. And today you can make apps where you have these things built into the application so that you don't have to do all these manual steps as a user to give a much better experience overall and maintaining a very high level of security.
That's 100% true. But you touched also an interesting point, because you mentioned technology, or rather an approach concerning security, or a way of authenticate to log into your banking system, which was valid some time ago. But technology is a thing which moves very fast. So new technologies were developed. They are still developed. Ways to authenticate, to use your mobile apps are constantly changing. This is not only a potential and something which eases the way how people can use mobile apps, but at the same time, it opens new doors for potential attacks. So the increasing development of technology is not only creating potential, but also some threats. Because cyber criminals are always and will be always looking at potential security gaps, and they will be always using different entry points to attack the customer. So from this point of view, it's also important to keep up with this cyber security race, and at the same time to find the golden mean between user experience and cybersecurity. So how this technological race looks nowadays? Is the number of attacks against mobile apps on the rise, or is it at a constant rate?
I think it's fair to say that it's on the rise. However, it's not as bad as you could see in certain other similar areas. If you look historically, there is a number of risks that you have, and I think if you look at mobile applications today, they are doing a lot more and providing a lot more functionality, and basically having a compromised banking or payment application or anything like that could expose you to all sorts of different types of risks, but it will also expose your company, if you're a bank, for instance, for reputational damage and also sorts of other types of risk like this. So it's an attractive target, but at the same time, these devices are relatively locked down by default. So there are some types of malware that you can see, and there are certain things. Certain other types of attacks which are more targeted, trying to modify applications and so on, which is also an interesting way of trying to attack and gain access to data, essentially.
Mm-hmm. A few years back, when looking at the banking systems, almost all attacks which were related to technological attacks were targeting web systems. They weren't targeting mobile banking apps because mobile apps were unexisting or very rare. But nowadays, the number of transactions, the number of people using mobile apps is significantly higher than a few years ago. So this starts, or even is already, a very important part of the banking sector, and each bank should therefore be extremely engaged in providing solutions not only for web but also for mobile. So how is it from your point of view? Is nowadays the mobile danger bigger than the web danger, or is it still at the same level?
No, I think the web danger is probably a higher issue, given that you have a much more complicated way of running the application inside a browser, which is typically done on a desktop computer, but it could also be done on a mobile device. Mm-hmm. So there are so many more areas where you can attack that, and I think the mobile applications are locked down with a sandbox, which is preventing quite a lot of these kind of concerns in the first
place. Yeah. Okay, but still, mobile applications are a thing which is extremely popular nowadays. It will remain popular. So protecting your device is something which should be not only a thing which banks should take into consideration from the end user's perspective, but also which clients should make sure that that their device is sufficiently protected. But from the bank's perspective, it's not sufficient to say to the client, listen, we are providing you a banking application, but it's up to you to make your device secured. And if anything happens, it's only your responsibility. So that's why banks have to make sure that their apps are well protected. And it's here when Promon enters and provides such an additional protection. How exactly Promon works? Because that's the basic question which can be asked at this point.
So what we can do is we can put kind of a additional level of sandboxing around your application process, which means that we are verifying everything the application is supposed to do and making sure that it's only doing that, and we are preventing others from tampering with your application. So I think in a nutshell, that's what we do. And then there are lots of different ways we are going about to actually achieve that. Lots of different things to consider when doing that. But that's the short answer.
That's the short answer, but that's the short answer which doesn't explain everything, because the main topic which we are discussing today is the way how security interacts with user experience. So we already said that we can invent absolutely very complicated and very secured way to securize a mobile application. But the whole thing is to create such protection in such a way not to hinder or not to make the user feel uncomfortable while using the application. So how Promon works? Because we know it's secure, but is it user-friendly?
I think from my point of view, what we try to do is to add our level of protection to the application in a way that doesn't really change the way the application is working in the first place. Mm-hmm. Which means that we should be completely invisible to the end user. There will be no behavioral difference if you are running this application and protecting it with our Shield technology compared to as if we're running it without the Shield technology. There's like a very small performance delay where you are delaying the application for a few hundred milliseconds when you're initially launching it, but other than that, there is nothing measurable and noticeable from a user's point of view. So I think that's the main takeaway from that. And of course, there might be some if you have a system which is compromised in certain ways, you have like a really bad badly broken device which is jailbroken and has malwares installed on it. You might have the experience that our technology will block it and basically say that sorry, you can't really use this app on your particular device. But that is not something which happens as a kind of accident. This is something which happens on those devices where someone has actually actively gone in and modified them in such a way that we would not allow running the application on those devices. So that's not something a regular user would ever see.
Yes, so in fact, during the normal usage of the mobile application with Promon running somewhere in the background, the user won't even notice that Promon is there in order to protect him.
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned jailbreak and malwares. So we already know that Promon works in such a way that the user in general won't notice anything in the background. But what kind of dangers exactly Promon works against or protects against? Because you mentioned jailbreak, which is an important form of attack, but I suppose there are many others which are also extremely dangerous.
So yeah, I think jailbreaks, or which is typically what you call it on iOS, or root kind of rooting your device is a Android terminology to achieve much of the same thing, isn't much really it isn't really an attack on the application. It's more about being able to circumvent the natural sandbox which exists on the device itself, which means that one application is by default sandboxed so that another application cannot really modify it or interact with it in certain ways. So if your device is jailbroken or rooted, then that guarantee doesn't really apply. That doesn't really pose a security threat to the application by itself, but it's often kind of an indicator of that there might be other risks attached with it. So being able to determine whether or not something is jailbroken or rooted, it's definitely a risk, because then you can tamper with the all sorts of resources for the application and so on. But the actual risk is when someone is actually doing that, if they're actually interacting with the application in a certain way and modifying and tampering with them, with the integrity of it. So that's more what you're really concerned about. So those things we are able to detect, both the situation where the sandbox is compromised, but also when someone is actually tampering with the application in real time. So that's definitely a threat you should take seriously. And there are hooking frameworks which are doing this by like maybe on a jailbroken device, but also sometimes by modifying the application directly, where you can basically change the logic of the application as it's running. And I mean, it's like a small prank you can do on maybe on your friends or something like that. Change their contact list to when they're calling their mom, they're actually calling someone else, which is of course all fun and games. But if you're changing the application at real time, so that when you are paying your friend, you're actually paying someone else, then it becomes like a serious threat. So that's some of the things you can do if you are in there as an attacker which has access to the process like this. Then another very common way to look at what is actually malware doing on Android these days. You have all these malwares which it does need some setting up from the user. So the user needs to be tricked somehow to enable the malware as being maybe a accessibility service, at which point the malware can be there always in the background and reading all the contents of the screen, but also can interact with the application without you really noticing, which means that everything you do with the application will be recorded and everything can be interacted with. So they can do kind of the same thing. Maybe they can send money to someone else or change the amounts, things like that.
Okay, and how about keyloggers, for instance?
Yeah, I think that the accessibility service actually can also provide the kind of keylogger experience, because it can read all the input you're entering into the application, but it can also alter it. But you can also consider if you install a third-party keyboard because you like the color of or the layout a bit better if you install your own one. It could also basically record everything that you are typing into it and send it off to somewhere you don't really know where. So that's also a risk. So it's also something that you should be able to tell whether or not that is how it is, and basically check against a allow list of which keyboards should be used for this application.
Okay. I suppose that you are regularly, on a regular basis, doing some analysis concerning how applications available on the market are currently protected, and how banking applications look like. Are they well protected against those dangers which you mentioned, or is it still something which banks should work on?
Yeah, so we do analyze applications all the time, and in fact we had a app threat report from the end of 2002, where we actually looked at banking and payment and financial apps in particular, where we looked at whether or not they have any type of protection. And we looked at it from a very fundamental point of view, where we looked at, is it possible to modify this application, and would it actually still work if we modify it? So basically what we did, we took the application down directly from Google Play in this particular case. Then we changed the application and installed it on our device. And then we basically observed, does the application work afterwards? And does it seem to provide all the functionality that it had initially? And what we found is that out of all the applications that we tested, and these were like top 100 global finance apps, about 50% would just work without any kind of problem afterwards. And then we could break it down a bit into the different types of applications. So some applications have more protections than others, but all in all, roughly half of all the applications would still just work. And that tells me that these applications have absolutely no protections whatsoever against any of these kind of attacks.
And those are, we should underline it, applications which are available in stores, which are downloaded every day by clients and used by those clients on a daily basis.
Yes.
Right. So there's still a lot of things to do in order to improve security. I also wanted to address the topic concerning the different scope of activity of Promon, because you're not present only in the financial institutions sector, you also provide security for other kinds of applications, not only financial applications. Do you see a significant difference between protecting financial applications and applications from other sectors?
Yeah, I think the technology from our point of view is pretty much the same, but the incentives and what we're trying to protect are slightly different, depending on the market and so on. So, I mean, a good example, which I often use when I talk about this, is if you consider installing one application on your mobile phone, which is doing like your regular banking needs from everyday banking applications, your incentives for hacking this application is rather slim. I mean, it's not like if you are hacking your own application or modifying your own kind of banking application in some way, all of a sudden you get access to all sorts of extra funds, because these banking applications are working with kind of a backend server where you don't really have that much access, even if you can modify the application itself. However, if you are looking at how can I hack my streaming application, maybe it's like your favorite movie streaming service, or if it's a game that is adding certain nuisances that you need to deal with. Maybe you have to watch lots of commercials and stuff like that for playing your game. Now, you might feel that if I can avoid looking at all those commercial videos or advertisings, then you're kind of gaining something. So you have an incentive to do that, which is also then losing money for the game developer in that particular case. So the technology can prevent both using much of the same techniques and much of the same technology, but the incentives are very different from what you need to protect and what the user wants to do.
Sure. When speaking of money, sometimes when talking to customers, those customers are obviously very interested in applying securized solutions and additional levels of protection to their clients, but at the same time they are concerned that that this will be a costly and very expensive thing to do. How would you judge it? Is it should cybersecurity be considered or be judged on this through this perspective concerning costs, or is it an expense or is it an investment? Because that's also an interesting point of view.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think to think of, I think it's more like a extra level of insurance. And the typical thing with insurance is that it will just cost you something until you really need it. So it's often kind of a very visible cost until you are in the deep end of the pool and you basically need to have some sort of protection. So from that point of view, I think it's an investment.
An investment, yes. And from also the bank's perspective or any firm's perspective, that's not only an investment concerning potential loss of money, but also potential loss of reputation, because attacks can be of a different scale and can have different consequences. From your experience, is it something which for firms is an important factor? Because some firms are not very limited in terms of their budgets. They can spend any amount of money on security, but are they concerned more on security or more on reputation protection?
I think if you look at financial institutions, there are like three main buckets where I would put kind of these reasons for why would they invest in this kind of security or not. So one of them could be that they are afraid of their loss of reputation, which is a very real thing. I mean, if you are losing a lot of money or a lot of customers are losing lots of money, and then it turns out it was because you didn't actually have any protection or any security in your application, that's a real problem for you. Another one is where there are like very specific banking regulations or like that, where basically it says that you have to have this type of protection. So it doesn't really matter if you care about the loss of reputation or if you actually want to have more security, but you are forced to by regulation. That's a very, very visible thing in especially in Europe and Asia. And I think the last thing is banks that actually wants to have the best security solution regardless of the other two, and maybe not completely in isolation of the other two, but still wants to have the best security they can provide.
The best security, and at the same time also provide the best user experience to their clients, which, as we can see, is not something contradictory, because both things can be achieved using, for instance, Promon's solution. So this brings us to a conclusion that security shouldn't be treated as an expense, as a costly expense, but it should be something that provides a sense of security, both to the client as well as to the end user, at the same time, without affecting the user's application satisfaction. So I think that's an important thing to underline. At the same time, also, we cannot forget that using the application and even the best protected application is also a thing which should be done by a client in such a way, in such a way that it doesn't imply any additional dangers which are related to the usage of such an application, because even the best level of security cannot replace common sense while using an application.
Indeed.
All right, Jan Vidar, thank you a lot for this very interesting conversation. Thank you a lot for your time, for your input. I think that we touched a lot of interesting points during this webcast. For those of you who have any additional questions or are interested in the solutions provided by Promon, feel free to reach out to us. I do highly recommend that you also take a look at both of our websites, at our company's websites, as well as on our social media accounts. So once more, thank you very much, Jan Vidar, for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot for watching. Have a great day, and hopefully see you next time.